to Between Two Bushes and our very special mini series with the Vagina Coach. So we have a special guest. Her name is Kim. She's known as the Vagina Coach, and she is going to educate us on all things pelvic floor, especially as it relates to pregnancy and misconceptions. And we got a lot of ground to cover. So welcome, Kim.
Hello. Thank you again for having me.
Yes, I am so excited for this episode because the title of the episode is Misconceptions, pelvic floor misconceptions. And
a lot of them.
There's so many. And they're really fun to talk about, actually. So the first one I wanted to talk about is constipation.
That's a big one.
We don't normally connect it to anything to do with the pelvic floor. Can you explain how constipation, some forms of it, does have indeed a connection with the pelvic floor?
Yeah, so it kind of goes both ways in a sense. So you can have a pelvic floor issue such as, and it's more to do with holding on to tension. So non-relaxing pelvic floor muscles, or people who habitually hold their abdomen in, those are two contributors to poor elimination. So holding your abdomen in can influence your digestion. So maybe things aren't moving as they should through the whole network. And then once it comes time to needing to get it out of our body, if we have non-relaxing pelvic floor muscles, that can make it harder to eliminate, and therefore we have straining. So then on the other side, yes, pelvic floor issues can contribute to constipation, but also constipation can contribute to pelvic floor issues. So if we are constantly straining and our pelvic floor muscles aren't able to relax, or if we don't have a diet that's optimized, so we have difficult to pass stools that are difficult to pass, all that pushing, that straining, that pressure directly influences the pelvic floor and can lead to some of the challenges like incontinence and pelvic organ prolapse, and you can get fissures and all sorts of things. So you can have it on both sides with regards to constipation.
Well, thank you for connecting that for us. And so pelvic muscles matter for holding stuff back, like urine, feces, and gas, but also for the ability to expel it as well. So,
yes, exactly.
So something to think about. If you're suffering from constipation, think about the muscles and the relationship to that. Okay, another topic, misconception. Queefing. Have you heard of queefing? It's kind of a slang term. It's a slang term. Is there a relationship between pelvic muscle tone and queefing?
Yeah, and actually, people associate it with lack of tone. So, my pelvic floor muscles are very weak and therefore I queef. So queef is when air can get trapped into the vagina, and then when there's an increase in intra-abdominal pressure, so maybe it's getting up off the floor, or maybe it's sometimes it happens during sex. There's all sorts of things can trigger the release of that air. So it's not gas. People call it vaginal farting, but it's not gas that's coming out. It's just trapped air that's coming out. And people associate it with laxity, but it can also be, again, the too tight or the non-relaxing as well. So it's not necessarily indicative of one or the other. And it's not like it's a super bad thing either, but it can be embarrassing, and not a lot of people like it or enjoy it. There are some people who actually they try to do it. Okay. So it can be an art, I guess you could say. But so that's essentially what's happening. There's trapped air that's coming out, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you have poor tone. Sometimes it can mean you have more tone than what would be considered optimal.
Some customers wrote me that they were embarrassed about queefing in yoga inversions in particular. And they were not doing the inversions in class. So it's so great to hear from them that they are now engaging and fully able to practice yoga without let or hindrance. So
for sure. Yoga can be a big one. So things like when your pelvis is elevated, so sometimes it can be down dog, sometimes it can be a bridge pose. And that's also sometimes if you're in a supine position, or if you're in a sexual position that you have your hips elevated, then sometimes it can happen then too. But
some customers wrote me about doggy style for that
Yeah.
reason and how that can happen. So
Yeah, and
yes,
it's different for everybody, really.
so we definitely want to make sure people can do whatever they want, again, without embarrassment. Um, okay, another thing that's I hear a lot is about incontinence from people when I talk about leakage, bladder leakage in particular. They say, "Oh, leaking's normal. I'm a mom."
Yeah, I hear it all the time. And media doesn't necessarily help with that message either. They perpetuate it, in my opinion.
Mhm.
It's the advertisements are including younger and younger women. So it used to be that it was typically older women, you know, what would be, I don't want to consider them necessarily seniors, but sort of women in their like 60s-ish, postmenopausal women. But now there's women in these commercials who are, you know, in their early 30s maybe, and they talk about it in, you should have one in your gym bag for when you go to the gym. And so there's messaging that perpetuates the message that it's just part of being a woman, and it's just something you need to accept, and don't worry, we've got these and you can wear them and your confidence will return. And there's a place for pads for sure. I believe it's temporary. There's a very small percentage of the population, potentially people who have nerve damage or spinal cord injuries, perhaps, that they need it all the time. And I'm grateful for those products for that case. But the majority of people who are using them can manage and overcome that issue and no longer need to wear pads. So it's the messaging that it's, you just have to accept it. That's what happens when you've had children or when you're getting older or,
Yeah.
you know, what have you. So
Yeah, that's the other piece. Oh, it's just part of getting older. And, you know, one time I was talking, I don't know, I was at a bar or something, and there was a woman there, a journalist. She said, anyway, when I told her what I was working on with the devices, she's like, "Why do you want women to feel shame about their bodies?" It's like, because she thought leakage was necessary or normal. And it's like, I don't want them to feel shame. I just don't want them to be hindered and inconvenienced if they don't have to. If
right,
they're of the subset of people who can address leakage, why not?
right,
You know, just gives them one less thing to worry about and deal with, right?
yeah,
And if not,
and
we got great product. If they can fix it, then there's great stuff out there like pads and diapers.
totally,
Why not?
totally. And I think there is. So I understand now what you're saying. So she was saying you're bringing light to something that will make people feel shame, but people already feel shame because of it. It doesn't, you know, people already know, people already feel like, you know, oh, my core is weak, my body's broken, you know, whatever the reasons are. And they then, because of the messages that are in media, need to think they need to accept it as just the way that it is. So then they live in shame. Now they stop having sex. Now they stop exercising. Now they do all these things. So they already feel shame and they already feel lost and they feel frustrated and they feel alone and they feel hopeless in some of the, well, I just have to accept this. Well, this is just the way that my life is going to be now. And by addressing these and getting the message out, I think it removes that shame. It opens up the fact that you're not alone and there are so many options for you, and it gives people that hope back.
I think it does too, quite frankly. And that's what we're up to. And that's what we're hearing, you know, because there's another misconception that's related. And that is, I've got these issues, but it's too late to fix it.
Yeah.
Now, my grandmother, like a year ago, she's 95. She was 95 at the time. She's like, "I think I need your device, mija." And it's like, well, grandma, you know. but it really, you know, I know with Kegelbell, we have customers into their 70s and 80s. But do you want to speak about it's too late misconception if you've heard it?
Yeah, totally. And so maybe in your 90s, 95 years old, but I applaud her for wanting to improve. And I think that that's amazing. And the fact that you have people in their 70s and 80s buying your product is awesome, because it is not too late. And sometimes people find out 20, 30 years after the fact that they may have been struggling with this for that long, and they're excited by the opportunities that there's something that they can do about it. So it can be, I mean, I've always come from a place of prevention. So if we can address these early on and prevent the problem from developing in the first place, that's ultimately what I would really love to see happen as we kind of in future generations. But I want the people who have been struggling for years, the people who are in their 50s, 60s, 70s, who, have thought that there was nothing they could do, or maybe they've tried Kegels before and they thought they didn't work. That there's so many different ways, there's different options. Most people have been doing Kegels incorrectly. Verbal instruction, we know, is not really enough. We need to have more visualization. We need to have assessment. We need to have biofeedback, things like your device as well too, that give people an awareness of something. And so we can improve so much on what has been said or tried before. And hopefully nobody gives up hope. Hopefully there's always something else somebody can try that can improve their situation. So you can be, my mom, I remember when I was first learning this, my mom was in her 60s. I don't remember her exact age at the times, but early to mid 60s, and she had had a hysterectomy. She had had bladder surgery. She wasn't having any more incontinence, but she was having chronic back pain, and she had a diastasis. And so when she was in her mid 60s, she started to do kind of the protocol stuff that I do, work on posture and breathing and pelvic floor activation exercises. And she reduced her interrecti distance in her diastasis, and her back pain improved. And, so she was postmenopausal woman who'd been through a lot already, and she still was able to make change. So there's so much opportunity for that. It's never too late.
I think the overall misconception is just about age, really, be it women in their 20s, even teens. If you're an athlete, it may happen sooner. If you have a baby when you're 21, it's going to happen probably in your 20s then. And so it's, to me, what was so fascinating is all the studies on how many women have leakage. And generally you see 30-something%, but the number is much higher in the 60% if you say, have you ever accidentally leaked urine? And it may be fairly infrequent, like with a violent sneeze or cough, but that counts. That counts. I've never leaked ever. So I'm in that 33% that have never leaked. But the rest have a little bit, and that's kind of a sign. Like, take advantage of the early warning signs, because it will get progressively, in most cases, not all cases, it will progress. So any age, really. And I think I really heard a lot for the 20 and 30-year-olds who have it, because again, shame. They have so much shame because they think it's a little old lady problem. Right. Or they think, I've never been pregnant, why do I have it? And, if anything, I hope one of those women hear this and know that, hey, there's a lot of you out there, and there is a solution. So yes. What about, and in those solutions, when I've interviewed like people, I'll go up to a group of ladies at like a yogurt place and say, hey, do you guys, like a mommy group, I'll go up to a mommy group and say, do you guys have leakage? What do you do? And I'll often hear, well, I heard there's a surgery. Here are some ladies in their late 20s saying, I heard there's a surgery. And that's all they've really heard.
Yeah.
They haven't heard about anything else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mother had a devastatingly bad results with surgery. Surgery is not a quick fix, but what is your thought about surgery being the only option and that misconception?
Yeah, surgery is definitely not the only option, and in my opinion, it's a last resort. So I'm not against surgery. It can be life-changing for many people, but I believe there needs to be other steps other options that are pursued along the way to kind of rule those other things out, the conservative measures first. Because, and I actually just posted today on Instagram, I had pursued surgery at one point, and I was kind of talking about the path where I ended up, and not having it and where I am now, and all the things that I really all the things that need to be considered first. So surgery is an option, and typically what happens when people finally feel like, okay, I've got to deal with this, and it's usually about 6 or 7 years before they actually start to pursue something. They've been struggling for a while. They'll go typically to their family doc, and the family doc may say, well, go home and do your Kegels, or they may say, prescribe a medication for overactive bladder with no real assessment. Is it truly an overactive bladder or not? Or they may refer to a specialist. So then the person goes to the specialist, and then the specialist is typically the surgeon. And there's not a lot of surgeons are surgeons. That's what they do. And they are amazing when we need them, but before we get to that point, there's nobody who's been talking about the other options, the pessaries, the pelvic floor physiotherapy, the exercise, the devices. There's none of that has been talked about yet. And oftentimes it's after the fact that people hear about those things as they become more and more educated, and they think, well, why didn't anybody tell me about this? So surgery can be a great option. It can create other issues. So that was a situation that occurred with your mom, unfortunately, where people think it's going to remove all my symptoms. And yeah, sometimes it does. Sometimes it creates other symptoms. But if the fundamental root causes of what has contributed to the development of the problem in the first place have not been addressed, surgery will fix some symptoms typically, but it will usually be temporary because the strategies or whatever the things that were leading to it in the first place have not been managed. So they still exist. So that means that the problem will most likely develop. And now because the system, the fascial system has had some influence from a cut with adhesions, now that can influence the muscles. So then you can you come up against other issues. So I'm not against surgery, but we really need to do our homework and we really need to pursue those conservative approaches first, in my opinion.
Yes, agreed. That whole trajectory that you just discussed is absolutely accurate. So I'm sure it resonates with a lot of people out there. And our last misconception for our misconception episode is, I've heard of Kegels, you do them at red lights.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big one. So Kegel exercises are, they're an exercise, and they were designed by a German physician. He wasn't German, by a physician who saw women having difficulty contracting and relaxing their pelvic floor. He used something called a perineometer, which is a biofeedback device that helped women see when they were contracting and relaxing to help re-educate that system. And what's happened over time is people think of a Kegel exercise as just a squeeze.
Right.
And if I squeeze harder, it must be better. And if I squeeze more, it must be better. And write-ups in the media have, historically been, well, they're easy to implement in your life. Just do them at every red light or at every stop sign or while you brush your teeth. And okay, great. The message is, at least they're promoting pelvic floor exercise, which is a good thing. But again, we know from the literature as well that a verbal instruction or just being told to do Kegels is not effective. So most people have they don't know what really a Kegel is. So it's kind of this elusive exercise. They're like, well, I've been told, I think I'm doing them. They told me to sit on the toilet and see if I can stop my flow of urine. Okay, so I can do that. And anyway, but if you're doing Kegel exercises in a static position all the time, especially if you're in a position where you're in a tucked pelvic position, like in a car, the muscles actually aren't going through their full range of motion. So they aren't actually it's not the best way to build strength and endurance and reaction time, so to speak. We need to train the pelvic floor in movement. So we need to be able to identify the pelvic floor muscles, contract and relax them appropriately, and then be able to do that in movement. So things like standing up from a chair or doing an exercise class, that's typically when the leaks are happening. So we need to train the pelvic floor to respond during those times, not while we're sitting at a red light or not while we're brushing our teeth. Does that make sense? So
it does. Thank you.
Yeah. So we have to, they work. In my opinion, Kegel exercises work when they're done correctly, when they're done coordinated with movement, when they're done consistently. And then the next step is when you add in a weighted device that can hypertrophy. Just like when we're resistance training, we have progressive weight that we're lifting as our muscles get stronger. And so we can use that same principle on the pelvic floor as well. And it's kind of a graduated approach.
Mm-hmm. I love it. I love it all. Thank you for tackling all of these misconceptions. I hope that we've done our part to try to knock some of those down and that we hear about them less and less in the future. Well, I really thank you from the bottom of my heart for this time together. And I look forward to the next time when we talk about pregnancy.
We'll see you then.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.